All right, so since 2006, Jim Kutsch has served as the president and CEO of the CNI in Morristown, New Jersey. It's the oldest guide dog school in the world and provides specially bred and trained dogs to guide people who are blind. It instructs blind people in the use and care of these dogs and advocates in behalf of blind people and the right to travel freely and independently. So tonight you're going to hear his own story, so thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
There you go. I got it.
There we go. Thank you very much, JC, and thank you. It's a delight to be here at the Academy and to speak as a part of the Skeptics. My dog Colby has heard this before, so he's going to sleep through this talk. I want to point out before I start that the rest of you don't have that excuse. So no more sleeping except for the dog down here in front. The title of my talk tonight is Dare to Succeed. That's Dare, D-A-R-E. But I've given this talk before, about a year ago, and the person that I told the title, who was going to introduce me, changed it to There to Succeed, T-H-E-R-E, to succeed. And I have to say that both words would suffice. Everyone, no matter what you're doing, should be there to succeed. But you also should dare to succeed in your life, regardless of the situation. In my case, situation of a disability. I'm going to talk about some personal examples this evening, and I'm going to describe some of the life challenges I've faced. I'll show how I coped with some of those challenges and solved the problems, and from those experiences, developed a set of life philosophies that work for me and might just be helpful for others as well. But this talk is not about you, the listener, being amazed at what I did, or how I dealt with instantly becoming blinded as a teenager in my junior year in high school. But it's more about attitude toward life and attitude toward whatever challenges you may be facing. Let me start with a little personal history. When I was in high school, I was what would probably be called a geek. I was interested in math and science. I ran the audio-visual equipment for the school. I was not a sports person. I didn't know how to play, and I wasn't interested in playing most sports, and as you can guess, I wasn't very good at it. So basically, I needed to find my place to fit in. I would not have been what my daughter calls the cool crowd when I was in school. But I had a friend who was interested in chemistry, in pyrotechnics, and he was making his own fireworks and aerial firecrackers. I was interested in riflery, guns, and was experimenting with things called carbide cannons. I grew up in West Virginia, and calcium carbonate is used in miner lamps, and you can make these really neat sounding cannons with this stuff. And back then, you used to be able to buy it in the local hardware store. These days, I'd probably be arrested as a terrorist, but we have to remember that this was in the 1960s, and it was a different world back then. So my friend and I moved on to more adventurous things than carbide cannons and started working with some black powder, gunpowder, and other chemicals. And I ended up in a neighbor's backyard giving him a demonstration of my latest concoction when the jar was a baby food jar that I was using as my chemistry set. When the baby food jar containing this mixture exploded in my hand. It resulted in partial loss of my right hand. I blew off most of my right hand, and I immediately lost my sight in both eyes because the flying glass fragments slashed up both of my eyes. So I was 16 and a half years old. I was at the end of my junior year, about a week from the end of class. Had a driver's license, had my own Volkswagen Beetle back then, and I came to the first really significant challenge that I ever faced as a young person. And that is, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? As I saw it then, at age 16, I had two choices. I could sit at home for the rest of my life as the poor blind kid and not do anything. I could wait for someone else to help me, or I could try to work myself with the challenges of being newly blinded and having the loss of most of my hand. Well, since then, I haven't necessarily always done everything in life right. But I think I made a crucial right decision back then as the first decision, and that was to look at the new blindness as an engineering or a science problem, not as something to feel bad about. I realized, oh, you're supposed to be sleeping. Sorry. He's got to see Craig in the back row there, his buddy. I realized that there were a lot of years beyond age 16, but I didn't know how to go about it, because this was 1967. There was no internet, so you couldn't just get on the internet and type, into Google, what do blind people do? There were few role models around. Think about television. There are not a lot of people with disabilities as good role models on television or in the movies. I mean, there's some bad role models, but there are not a lot of good role models for people with disabilities. And my parents didn't really have a lot of idea of what to do either, because most parents aren't really equipped to deal with a child with a disability, especially a newly acquired disability, because up until age 16 I didn't have any type of disability. So I started with a simple problem. Telling time was important. I wanted to know what time it was during the day. And time's very important. You need to know, when your radio program is going to come on, when a TV show is going to come on, and so on. So telling time was important. There used to be, now everybody carries cell phones, of course, but remember, I'm an old timer. There used to be a phone number in every town that you could dial, and the phone company would tell you what time it was. So you dial this number, and the time is, and they would tell you. So that's the way I was telling time at first. But that became a problem if one of my parents, or I have two brothers, one of my brothers was on the phone. Then I couldn't pick up the phone to find out what time it was. So I took my alarm clock, took it down to the workbench, and took the glass off the front of the alarm clock so that I could touch the hands. And this was a very first example of what I think is an important approach to life, especially for a person with a disability, but it applies to everyone. You should strive to make your own solutions, make your own tools. Don't wait for someone else to fix the problem. You might be waiting a really long time. You need to be your own advocate. Think about what you need to succeed and move forward, and find it, make it, borrow it, learn about it, or whatever. After that, I completed high school. I went back to my senior year with no real training. My parents would read the textbooks to me in the evening, and my teachers in high school would keep me after class and verbally give me my test questions. They would just read the test and I would verbally give the answers. But after high school, I went to a special program in Western Pennsylvania where I did learn how to do things better as a blind person. I learned Braille for reading and writing. I learned to travel with a long white cane. Back then, there weren't talking calculators. We actually learned to do math on an abacus. Something you don't forget. I still could probably do some abacus math if I had to, but not needed much anymore. Then I went off to college. My plan was to major in electrical engineering. All through high school, even junior high school, I was interested in science and engineering, as I said. So I was going to major in electrical engineering. But I didn't really have the, let's say, the enthusiastic support of the guidance counselors. They basically said, a blind person can't be an engineer. What are you talking about? So I finally talked the advisors into the idea that why not let me go take electrical engineering classes. But on my second day on campus, I had an argument with the chemistry department. Somebody in the chemistry department said, we don't know how to deal with this blind guy in the chemistry lab. Now, At the time, I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. Later, I wondered, maybe it wasn't that they didn't know how to deal with a blind guy in chemistry, but maybe they didn't want this particular blind guy back in the chemistry lab after my high school experience. Maybe they were worried about making sure the chemistry building was still there at the end of the semester. But the chemistry department said I couldn't take chemistry, and the electrical engineering department said, well, hey, chemistry is required. You've got to take chemistry or you're not going to be in electrical engineering. It was my second day on campus. And so what do? You're a freshman, second day on campus, 17,000 students at West Virginia University. They weren't really worried about me, particularly. So I decided I better switch to something else really quickly. I switched to philosophy, realized philosophy was a little bit limiting, although it was very fascinating, but it was a little limiting as far as careers are concerned. And I switched to psychology with the idea that I would become a teacher of people with disabilities. Around this time, the end of my freshman year, I came to Morristown, New Jersey to get my first seeing eye dog. And in many ways, coming to the seeing eye was a major change in my life. I met a person there, another blind man who was getting his dog, who worked in computer programming. At the time, we didn't have any computer classes in high school. Computers were fairly new on the scene when I was in high school. But my friend Norm talked about it a lot while we were training with our dogs, and I went back to the university and said, this computer stuff is pretty neat. And I started taking computer science classes. It was much more interesting than psychology, I thought, at the time. So I went back to college and switched to computer science and went to find a job at the University Computer Center. Well, that's an interesting thing too. You know how tough it is to find jobs? Probably you've looked for summer jobs or other jobs. It's pretty tough to find a job, but it's even tougher when it's a person with a disability looking for a job, because you get all sorts of roadblocks. You get people who say, well, you can't do that, mostly. Maybe somebody will say, how can you do that? But usually it's you can't do that. So I had to really fight for my job. I had good grades in computer science. Clearly I was passing the classes, and I wanted to work as a student programmer in the computer center for the university. So the end of the semester, I remember this very well, I went home in December for the Christmas holidays, and the manager of the computer center said, we'll think about this and let you know. So I went home, and the next day I called him, and I said, okay, you've had a day, I'm home now, have you thought about it? Can I have the job? He said, no, we're still thinking about it. Well, I called this guy nearly every day through the entire Christmas break. And at the end, before New Year's and before I went back to the university, he finally said, yes, you can have the job, will you come back? And I think he kind of ran out of excuses along the way with this, just because I kept talking to him every day and he didn't have any other way to say I wasn't the right person for the job. But it brought another challenge. How do you access a computer without looking at it? Imagine interacting with a computer without looking at it. Human readers was the first choice. Just find somebody else, a fellow student, and say, hey, read this for me. That worked okay, except maybe they weren't available, or maybe they were on a different schedule, or didn't have time. I even tried hiring other people to read computer output. But again, it was difficult to find somebody all the time. I learned quickly that I needed independent access to the computer output. I needed to get that computer output myself without somebody else being involved. So I started looking around at what was in the environment. We had a printer, not a laser printer of today, but an impact printer where the letters actually hit the page with a ribbon, like a typewriter, to make the print. And I was standing one day thinking about my problem, standing next to the printer, and the printer's making all this racket, making all kinds of noise. And I thought, I wonder what you could do with this noise. When I was in high school, I became a ham radio operator, and I had learned the Morse code. And I started putting these two things together, the hobby of ham radio and the knowledge of Morse code, along with my problem of how, as a blind person, can I get computer output. So I thought, yeah, you could probably make Morse code noises. So I thought about it a little bit, worked with the printer, and found out that certain things that the printer printed made a lot of noise, like the letter W, because it's got a lot of ink on it. If you think about the letter W, capital W is the noisiest thing you could print. But spaces are pretty quiet. So I wrote computer software to print lots of W's and spaces and W's and spaces. And when it was done, you had this just page of W's that people would look at and say, what is this junk? But it wasn't important what was printed on the page. What was important was what it sounded like when it was printed. And if you listen to it print this, it was actually going and in Morse code, reading my computer output. That worked for a while. Everybody kind of got used to trash cans full of pages with nothing but W's printed on them. And I moved to the alarm bell because I started wasting the paper. There was an alarm bell. These are big computers. I'm not talking about personal computers or laptops. These are like fill-a-room computers that we were working with back then. And the computers had an alarm bell, and if something horrible went on inside the circuitry of the computer, this alarm went off and everybody, was all in panic about what was happening. And you could turn the alarm bell on and off in software. So I moved my program to using the alarm bell, and I turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, and do the timing right, and I started sending Morse code with the alarm bell. So that worked even better because I wasn't wasting paper, except again, I was always a troublemaker. I was kind of the lightning rod in the organization. So everybody would come running out of the rooms wondering if the computer was exploding or melting down or catching fire as the alarm was going off, and I would just say, no, I'm just doing an assignment for next Thursday's class. So I ended up graduating in psychology with a minor in speech, in radio broadcasting, and another minor in philosophy because I had a lot of classes in those things. And then got a job, of all places, back in the electrical engineering department. So you got to kind of remember, be careful what you wish for, okay? I went back to the electrical engineering department because they were doing a project. This was West Virginia. There are a lot of coal mines in West Virginia, and the coal mines are really long and really unoccupied. They would have miles and miles of tunnels till you get out to the part where they were actually mining the coal. And they had to monitor all these long corridors for bad gases and heat and fire and so on. And the mining companies would actually have employees that would just wander the mine to make sure there wasn't a fire or a problem or too much gas in some area. Well, the electrical engineering department was working on monitoring that with computer sensors. And they were great at computer sensors, but they weren't really great at computer software. So they wanted a computer science person to do the software. And I got hired back in the computer science department. One of my most enjoyable meet at the water fountain conversations was the second day I was there working in the electrical engineering department. I ran into my freshman electrical engineering advisor. And he said, "Hey, Jim, what are you doing these days?" And he said, "Too bad you couldn't be an electrical engineer. What are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm working here in the electrical engineering department with you." And he found that to be quite an interesting revelation. I went on to graduate school. I really liked teaching and went to receive my PhD, study for, and eventually received my PhD in computer science at the University of Illinois. While I was there, I saw one of the first telephone response units for computers. Everybody can call and get airline reservations, bank balances, all kinds of stuff where you call and type in touchtone numbers or talk to the computer on the phone. But when I was in graduate school in the mid-1970s, these were just coming on the scene. The very first ones of these systems were typically banks or credit card companies where you could call, you want to go buy a six-pack of beer tonight, but you got to go call and find out if you have enough credit on your credit card. Am I up to my limit of $1,000 yet? So lots of banks and lots of credit cards were doing these computer systems. And I thought, this is an even better solution than the previous solution of using Morse code. So my dissertation project at the University of Illinois was to design the first talking computer for blind computer users. That was a fun project. It was a project that was valuable to me. And today everything talks. I mean, you get talking calculators, talking watches. If you have an iPhone, today this stuff is built in. Apple was the first company, and by the way, it's only been in the last 10 years, but Apple was the first company that actually builds accessibility, as it's called, into their iPhone products and all products for people who are blind. But back in the 1970s, this was true groundbreaking research to have a computer that would talk to a blind person and use the keyboard for normal input. So that gets me through school. This is why I didn't want JC to do my whole bio, because I just gave it all to you right now. That gets me through school, but challenges don't end when you get out of school. Life includes a lot more than just school. Family, work, hobbies, volunteering, community service. So I continued my interest in ham radio, but ham radio equipment isn't generally made for blind people. So I couldn't read the dials or the knobs, and so I started developing a lot of techniques to take the knobs off and get a little file and file little notches in the knobs. Or I used to do things with hair clips or bobby pins and mark things, or put a little glob of glue on a knob. I needed to read meters, indicators, as part of the radio hobby, and that's a highly visual thing. But the problem as a blind person is, how do you do what most people do with sight with one of your other senses, with the sense of touch, taste, smell, or hearing? Now think about those 5 senses. The sense of sight has the highest bandwidth. You see a lot of stuff really fast. Huge, huge bandwidth. Lots of data coming in very fast. Let's go to the other extreme. The sense of taste and the sense of smell have very limited bandwidth. So the idea of, smell is probably okay if you're worried about whether you're burning dinner as a blind person. But the sense of smell is not a really practical sense to use for input of data. So it pretty much leaves tactile, touch like Braille and so on, or hearing. So to solve the meter problem, I was working with some friends. We developed some circuitry that did audio tones. The further the meter needle went across the dial, the higher pitch of the tone. And the lower the meter was, the lower pitch of the tone. And those audio tones were a great way to solve the problem of not being able to look at the meter. Of course, I needed to put up lots and lots of big antennas, and that involves getting other people to come and help. But I had a friend who was afraid of heights, and so I would work with him. Remember what they say about heights? You've always heard the expression, just don't look down. Well, I don't have that problem. So I can do the height thing, and you don't have to tell me not to look down, because it's not going to matter anyway. So my friend Bob and I would work on antennas at his house and my house. I would do all the roof work, because the heights didn't bother me, and Bob, who was afraid of heights, would do all the work on the ground, and we were a great team to be able to put these antennas up. But we became a sideshow for all the neighbors. Everybody came out of their houses and all around the neighborhood, the blind guy's on the roof again. Let's all go watch and see if he's going to fall off today. They'd come out, bring soda, bring blankets, lay in the yards, watch me on the roof to see if today was going to be the day that I fell off the roof. I went on to teach college for a while as a professor, and then went to Bell Labs, worked there for many years, and systems along the way became more complex. There was a DOS computer, then there were Windows, and then Windows XP, and then Windows 7, and so on. And every time the access problems get worse. It seems like once you sort something out, then the next thing comes along, and a door closes, and you have to go work out the solution again. It never ends, basically. It's a lifelong cycle. Pursuing my side interests as a blind person presented some challenges too. I was interested in stock trading and following charts. And again, stock charts or any kind of graph is highly visual. You've got to worry about where's the line and what's it doing. Is it going up or down or oscillating or going up exponentially? Is it a J-curve and so on. So again, I spent some time working on audio representation, presenting the chart in audio. So the time horizon was left to right, and the frequency, higher pitch, was a higher line on the chart. Around this time, my kids were interested in a program that our church was putting on for biking, a 200-mile summer bike trip for junior high youth. And my son said, I really want to go to this bike trip, and we were very supportive of him doing the bike trip. But then he came home from one of the planning meetings at the church, and he said, Dad, they need parents to come on this trip too. Okay, why don't you come on the trip on this 200-mile biking and camping trip. It was a 2-week trip. We were biking 30 miles a day and camping somewhere different every night. So I thought, well, this is kind of an interesting problem. I had ridden a bike when I could see, but as a blind person, I started following my son around, listening to his derailleur. So, you know, he drives in front, I listen to the derailleur and try to follow the noise. Had a terrible problem with that. I ended up, on Saturday, we were riding around our neighborhood, and people on both sides of the street were mowing the grass. Well, to a person who is blind, high noise is like you walking into a whiteout, into a snowstorm. I lost all sense of any sound in the environment with a lawnmower on my left and a lawnmower on my right. So I stopped, which was the only logical thing, pulled the bike to the side of the road and stopped. And Jason comes back and he says, Dad, what are you doing? Why are you stopping? Come on, we've got a lot more riding to do. And I said, I can't hear you anymore in all this noise. So sometimes you have to decide when to give up. I gave up on riding my single bike. I decided, you know, it's probably better for Jason to have a dad around than for me to go get run over between a truck and something else. More on this later, speaking of hitting trucks. But I decided that I wasn't going to give up, though, on the bike trip. So I started learning about tandem bikes, bicycles built for two, and looked into, okay, how do those work? Well, the way they work is the person in the front does all the steering. The person in the front is called the captain. This is a tandem lesson. The person in the back is called a stoker. Now, you all are way too young to remember steam engine locomotives driven by coal. Railroads, you know, the coal-fired railroads. But the stoker was the guy who worked on the railroad, and all he did all day was shoveled coal into the fire. He was stoking the fire. Well, that's what it means to be a stoker on a tandem bike. You're the rider in the back, and all you're doing is pedaling as hard as you can possibly pedal, putting all the power into the bike. My wife is a foot shorter than I am. And tandem bikes, the people who make tandem bikes are sexists. They want the big guy in the front and the little lady in the back of a tandem bike. Well, it didn't work for us. I needed to be in the back and she needed to be in the front. And we couldn't find a tandem bike that would fit us. So, do you give up or do you look for another solution? We looked for another solution, and it turns out there are several companies that make custom bikes for serious bike competitors. We went and saw one of those companies in Philadelphia and said, here's our problem, what can you do for us? And he engineered a custom bike. We called it the wedge of death. It looked like a wedge coming at you. It was a lot shorter in the front. The handlebars were much closer to the seat, and then it stretched way out and up in the back for me. And we had this custom tandem bike built. I thought things were going pretty well. Then my kids grew up, moved out, went to college, all normal stuff. But around that same time, my ex-wife said, you know, the kids are gone, and I'm not a mom anymore, and I guess I don't really feel like being a wife very much anymore either. So that ended up in a divorce. So after many years of having my wife in my life and the kids in my life, suddenly I realized I've been a pretty lazy blind person. Either my wife or my daughter used to match my clothes in the morning. You know, you don't want to wear something awful together. I was never really, even when I could see, I was never really that involved in fashion. I didn't have a fashion sense. So suddenly I'm realizing, whoa, I just lost my daughter to college and my wife to divorce, and now I'm going to be, you know, the laughing person, the person everybody laughs at around AT&T when I come in horribly mismatched clothes. So I had to come up with a solution to that problem. So remember, engineering is your friend. There's always an engineering solution. You probably can't see this from there, but there is a tag on that pocket, and the tag says 21 in print and in Braille. And so this is suit 21. Here's the tag on the back of this tie. This one says 7. That's tie number 7. So I put all these numbers in a spreadsheet on my computer. And I know what color suit 21 is, and it goes with tie 7. Somebody has to tell me that once, but then I write down all the numbers, write down what goes with what else. So I had to come up with a solution to that problem. I moved to a new home, and the microwave, one of the worst things in the world for blind people, are these displays and flat panels. You know, the engineers think it's great. There's low cost. You don't have to have real buttons. All you have to do is sort of paint some stuff with ink on the front of the microwave. You know, push here for popcorn or push here for 10 seconds and so on. But you can't find those, or by the time you have touched it enough to find the right buttons, you've programmed it to make coffee 2 weeks from now. So the microwave in the new home was really a problem that again had to be solved, had to come up with a solution. I solved that problem by coming up with a thick piece of film, sort of like an overhead from the old overhead projectors, and then cut out a little square hole where all the buttons were. So I had this like a picture frame big, with all the cutouts over all the buttons on the microwave. Independent travel was always a challenge. One of the things this entire country is based on is independence. The ability to go wherever you want, whenever you want. And as part of that, independent travel was important. I said I had a driver's license. I said I had a car. I solved that problem with my 7 seeing eye dogs. Colby is my 7th dog. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I know we're running out of time. But that was the solution to that problem. And they have been great, great solutions. So along the way, I've started sharing some of my life philosophies. I'll quickly summarize them. Life philosophy number 1, you can't always choose your situation, but you can choose your attitude. Attitude is everything. How you view your situation is far more important than what the situation is. You may not be in control of every situation, but you are always in control of your reaction and your attitude. Life isn't fair. Just accept it and move on. I didn't think it was fair that I couldn't drive my Volkswagen anymore. But I got a dog and started walking places and catching cabs. It wasn't fair that I was right-handed before I blew my hand off and had to learn to do things with my left hand. But I did. I learned to type actually one-handed, since I don't have enough fingers on the right hand to type. Second philosophy that has always been effective for me is look for what you can do for others, not what you can get from others. Diversity is essential as you work with other people. If all of your friends are exactly like you, then you have a lot of spare people in your life. There's plenty of chances to use different talents of different people. You need to focus on the abilities, not the limitations or the disabilities of others. When I did these bike trips with my son, the man from our church who was responsible for it, our youth minister, his name was Roger. Roger was a great strategic planner. He'd say, well, we're going to take all these bikes and we're going to go from this campground to that campground and we're going to get there and so on. But he didn't think about the details. He was the high-level strategy guy, but he needed somebody to help him with the details. And he and I became partners in planning all these bike trips for several years. I would say, Roger, where are we going to eat lunch? You know, you got us riding 30 miles here with no lunch, and that's going to take too long. We're all going to be very hungry. My friend Bob in the antennas, diversity again. He didn't want to do heights. I was willing to do heights, and we teamed up as a team, a diverse team, not a team of like people. Philosophy 3, you are always on stage. Someone, somewhere, is watching you. Get used to it. As a disabled person, it's especially true that you're always on stage, because I can't go around and be in stealth mode. I've always got this dog with me, and everybody's looking and pointing and saying, look, Mom, a dog. Look, Dad, a dog. As a Blair student, you are an example of the Academy. You can be a good example or a bad one. And it's entirely your choice. I mentioned before, everybody waiting for me to fall off the roof. The other thing I did was had a wood stove in our home in West Virginia. And so I would go out and chainsaw the firewood. Well, if you thought they were excited about the blind guy falling off the roof, they were really excited about the blind guy with a chainsaw. They were waiting and saying, well, you already lost one hand, let's see if you can do an arm or a leg. You know, so. But I did it anyway, and I knew I was on stage. I knew they were watching. Life philosophy 4, be your own advocate. I talked about this a lot. Don't be a victim. Go solve your problems and be a self-advocate. Don't wait for somebody else. And don't decide it can't be done. Go figure out how to do it. Gave you many examples of that, with the Braille from the line printer, the Morse code, and lots and lots of lists of examples. And number 5, be persistent. Results aren't always on your time schedule. They don't always come when you want them to come. Sometimes there are brick walls, but you have to realize the brick walls are there just to keep out the other people that don't want it as badly as you do. When you run into one of those brick walls, look for an alternative. You don't always have to go over it. Maybe you can go around it. Pursuing electrical engineering was an example. I went around the wall, later worked for the department. Getting a job at the university, I didn't let them say, well, we're still thinking about it forever. I pounded on them until they finally said yes. And the custom bicycle is another example. Those were my 5 life philosophies until a year ago. A year ago, I was giving this talk in a job program. It was a program where people were talking about careers. And the session description with my talk had this as the text. Career management was the name of the section of the conference. For today's employees, it's about lifetime employment. It's lifetime employability, not lifetime employment. It's about lifetime employability, not lifetime employment. Jobs are essentially adventures where you must continuously learn and grow and be able to change. I thought that was so cool, and it really struck me as I thought about my life philosophies that I decided I needed to add 2 more. Life is an adventure and always be learning. So let me tell 2 more quick stories. Ham radio, I said I was interested in a long time ago, and one of the newest things is something called software-defined radio, where the radio is not a piece of hardware anymore with a bunch of knobs and buttons, but it's in software in a computer. Most of the functions are done now inside the software, and most of these radios are not accessible. They're not knobs and buttons to push for a blind person to figure it out. So 2 years ago, I decided this is pretty inaccessible, so I bought one. I decided I need to figure out how to make one of these things accessible and learn a little more. Because learning, I think, is an important characteristic of life, no matter how old you are, to make it accessible. As for the adventure part, a year and a half ago, Marty's Bicycle Shop in Morristown decided they'd run a Grand Fondo bike ride. It's a fundraiser, and the Seeing Eye was going to be one of the groups to get the money from the fundraiser. After 20 years not being on my tandem bike, I decided, let's get the bike out again and ride in this thing last year. So I was remarried by this time. My second wife and I decided to ride. By the way, she's also blind. She hadn't ridden since high school at all, and had never ridden on a tandem. So we found another couple that were interested in riding with us, and decided we'd start to get back in riding shape a year and a half ago for last summer's Grand Fondo. So on my 3rd ride out with my new captain Rob, we set out on a 12-mile ride, which we thought was pretty good for our 3rd ride ever. He'd never been on a tandem before these 3 rides. But at about the 11.5-mile mark, we're feeling pretty good. We're a half a mile from my home, and we had a disagreement with a fire truck. Fire trucks are difficult to have disagreements with when you're on a bike and they're a fire truck. Now, the fire truck was parked and unoccupied, which adds to the story, but we ended up trying to go between the fire truck and the curb and didn't quite make it. We were going way too fast and we went down. And I cut my leg. So the fire truck people were there practicing on something, and they came out and said, "Oh, Blood, this is cool, we'll practice on you." So I got pulled into their practice, and then they called their ambulance buddies, and the ambulance came over. I ended up going to the emergency room for about 40 stitches in my leg because I ran into this truck and cut my leg. I talked to my mother, and she said, if your father was still alive, he would say, "Why is he riding a bike?" Doesn't that sound like a parent thing? Let me translate it. What that means is, why is this 60-year-old blind guy out riding a bicycle? And the answer is, because it's an adventure. What? Why not? Embracing adventures is part of being alive. So, I'm going to add to my list Philosophy 6, always be a student, and Philosophy 7, life is an adventure. These philosophies have all worked well for me. Maybe they'll work for you, maybe they won't. Feel free to shamelessly steal from these or develop your own. But as you proceed in the rest of your academy life here, and as you move on to college and beyond, just keep in mind, you own your future. Start with your attitude. Look for what you can give to life, not what you can get from it. Since you're on stage anyway, you might as well perform well. Don't be a victim. Be your own advocate. Be persistent. Most things take lots more than one try. Always be a student and live your life as an adventure. We talked about the seeing eye at the beginning. The seeing eye has been an extremely important part in my life because the dogs have been with me in everything I've done and every place I've gone. I'm going to stop. I'm going to show a very short video if I can get JC's help with the video equipment. I've given up my role as projectionist. I'll turn it over to him tonight. And this is a 6-minute video that talks about what we do at the Seeing Eye. Breeding dogs, raising dogs, and training blind people to have more effective and fulfilled lives with these dogs. I encourage you to take a look at the video, and after this is done, we'll have about 6 or 7 minutes for Q&A. So think of your questions. Go ahead and roll with the film.
Yep.
Often when you start out on a new path, you may not know where you'll end up. There's a feeling of excitement and anticipation about the journey ahead, often tempered by fear of the unknown. Where will this new path lead? What's around the next corner? Can I get past the obstacles ahead?
Perhaps a little bit, and you're past it. Nice job, Brad.
Will I make it? For decades, people who are blind and visually impaired have embarked on new beginnings at the Seeing Eye, located in Morristown, New Jersey. They have come from all walks of life, from across all 50 states and Canada, from high school students to retirees. They all arrive at the Seeing Eye sharing a common goal: to begin a journey to greater independence. The Seeing Eye grew from the partnership of two pioneers. In the 1920s, Dorothy Harrison Eustace, an American living in Switzerland, was breeding and training German Shepherds for police work. Dorothy wrote an article for the Saturday Evening Post about a German school that trained dogs to guide blinded war veterans. That story was read to Morris Frank, a 19-year-old from Nashville who'd been blinded in childhood. He wrote to Dorothy, and she agreed to train a dog for him. Morris joined Dorothy in Switzerland and returned to the United States with Buddy, the first Seeing Eye dog. Then Morris and Dorothy established the Seeing Eye, the first dog guide school in the United States, named for the magazine article that had started it all. Today, the Seeing Eye continues this dream of creating new beginnings. The journey begins at the Seeing Eye's breeding facility in Chester, New Jersey. There, the Seeing Eye breeds Labrador Retrievers, German Shepherds, Golden Retrievers, and Labrador Golden Crosses. Dedicated in 2002, the breeding facility was designed to create an optimal environment for puppies to learn from their very first days. Puppies are sent out to carefully selected puppy raisers who teach basic obedience skills and create the foundation for a loving bond with the puppy's eventual owner. At about 14 months, puppies are brought to the Seeing Eye for evaluation by veterinary staff and rigorous training with instructors.
As instructors, we train 10 dogs at a time for 4 months on the property, on the campus, and here in Morristown to be Seeing Eye dogs. And then the 5th month, we train those dogs to guide our graduates. And the dogs do a lot for our students. It's amazing to watch throughout class just their confidence go up as the trust in their dog increases. It really is an amazing process to be a part of.
Students are matched with a Seeing Eye dog and spend up to a month in training. They return home owning their dogs. Thanks to the generous support of donors, students need only pay $150 for their first dog, $50 for each successor dog. No student has ever been turned away by the Seeing Eye for lack of funds.
My name is Justin Coughlin, and I lost my vision at age 11 due to a degenerative disease called familial exudative retinopathy. I really started thinking about getting a Seeing Eye dog after I moved to Brooklyn, New York, navigating the sidewalks and busy streets. I needed help. The thing that really impressed me about the Seeing Eye program, right from the get-go, they were extremely efficient, very thorough in the interview process. They made sure that I was somebody who was capable of handling a Seeing Eye dog. I am a professional musician, and Candy's there with me at every gig. Is a big help, that's for sure. I definitely love her, and I think she likes me.
My name is Kathy Murray. I'm losing my vision due to an eye disease known as retinitis pigmentosa. It's getting more difficult to deal with my daily tasks, cooking, and doing homework with my children. And I still have to be a mom. I had a cane. I didn't feel comfortable with it. I had grown up in Morris County and I've always heard of the Seeing Eye. I gave them a call about 5 years ago, and we were greeted with such open arms, and if you had any issues, if you had any problems, you can go to them and they work with you and they make you feel so comfortable. When I received Winnie, I had her for a year and I realized how much my life had changed. The worry is not there anymore, and I can walk through anywhere I want to without that fear of getting hurt or crashing. She and I just love each other so much. There's such a respect and a love for each other. It's enhanced my life in the sense that I've learned to trust somebody to guide me.
And forward. Up straight.
The Seeing Eye offers follow-up services for the life of each partnership.
Excellent.
Full-time, community-based instructors provide home visits for graduates if the need arises. Since 1929, thousands of people have trusted the Seeing Eye to help them embark on a new beginning, to enhance their daily lives, to strive for new professional goals, to open a door to greater independence. Our students start from many different places with different hopes and dreams. At the Seeing Eye, year after year, we celebrate where they finish. You too can be part of the celebration. Join those whose support continues to open these doors to success. The Seeing Eye's endowment covers all fundraising and administrative expenses, so every gift directly supports the Seeing Eye's programs. Please call us at 800-539-4425 or visit www.seeingeye.org/support us.
So that gives you an idea of what we do at the Seeing Eye and why it's so important. My dogs have been with me at all the important situations of life. They've been with me at college, in classes, in graduation, business meetings, professional trips. They were there with me in the delivery room when my kids were born. That was a comic sight. I was all dressed up in the face mask and the gloves and the boots, and of course they didn't have any to fit the dog. So I was all dressed up and holding my new child, my new son, and my then dog came over and gave him a big lick without without any of all the sterile garb. Let me stop. We have 5 minutes left, longer if I don't get the hook here, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about anything I said or anything about the seeing eye.
Feel free to just raise your hand. We'll just pick on you. Go ahead.
What kind of criteria do you have for the people who train the dogs before they come to the facility?
The puppy raising?
Yes.
Okay, puppy raisers have to be at least 9 years of age. And they need to have an environment that's safe for the dog. And you can't have a household where nobody's home from 5:30 in the morning when everybody goes and catches a train into New York until 10 o'clock at night. So somebody has to be around. It doesn't have to be every minute of every day. And we want one primary person to be responsible for the dog. Later the dog is going to be assigned to one blind person. So when my daughter was raising puppies, she raised 4 when she was in junior high school. The whole family helped, of course, but the dog she was raising always slept in her room on the floor next to her bed and so on. We have puppy raising clubs. You need to go attend the club meetings. They happen a couple times a month, and you go there with other people in your local community that are raising the dogs. And that's basically the list. We provide we provide money for buying the dog food and other things, and we provide all the veterinary care. You just have to put in a lot of work and love.
Yeah, Mr. Bill.
Lots of the teachers at Blair have dogs, and none of them are especially well behaved. What's the one mistake you think most people make with dogs?
The one mistake most people make with dogs, I think, is inconsistency. Dogs like to understand the rules. They get a real sense of security and comfort from knowing the rules. And when sometimes it's okay to be on the bed and other times it's not, when sometimes it's okay to eat snacks that somebody's handing you at the dinner table, but when guests are there and you can't, the inconsistency is one of the biggest mistakes I think people make with dogs, and probably not giving them a job to do some obedience exercises and the like.
Earlier when you said you would be on the roof for the interior job, and people will come out and watch you?
Yes.
Or with the chainsaw?
Yes.
And cutting the wood? Were they like coming and making fun of you, or were like they in awe?
Well, probably a little bit of both, or else it was just a really boring day and there was nothing good on TV. Now, some of them were thinking it was amazing, and others were just like waiting for an accident to happen. That's it. We're out of time. No last questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Bill.
The student body has a small gift for you, Mr. Kutsch, in gratitude for your being here this evening. I will give away what it is. It's a Blair tie.
Oh, well, thank you.
We took the liberty
I'll have to put a new number on it.
7 on the back.
Yeah. Okay.
You think it'll?
Will it go with this suit, folks?
Yeah.
All right.
Go with that suit.
I'll mark it that way.
So thank you for the wisdom and the 7 principles. We have our own 7, but I like Mr. Kutsch's as well. Rival to Blair 7 principles.
I didn't know I was coming to a competitive set of systems.
So thank you.
Well, thank you all for your attention, for your interest. I know when I was young, interacting with people with disabilities was kind of weird and strange, and hopefully, if nothing else, I showed you that we're all weird and strange in our own ways, whether we have disabilities or blind or not blind. And thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk tonight. I wish you all best success in your pursuits.